Welcome to Dark Loops Productions, Chatting with Creatives. I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty. I'm a cognitive scientist philosopher at Illinois State University. And today we've come together to discuss this amazing new movie, The Fix. Not only do we get to discuss the movie, but we get to speak about it with the creative in charge, Kelsey Egan. Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
That's fantastic. Just give a brief bio. Kelsey Egan is an American South African filmmaker, writer, actress, and stunt performer. She founded the Cape Town-based production company Crave Pictures. Her short film Gargoyle, 2009, and science fiction film Glass House, 2021, were nominated for South African Film and Television Awards. Glass House received 6 SAFTA nominations, including Best Feature Film, winning 5. Glass House also received the Best Picture Award at the 2022 Electric Dreams International Film Festival. And at this year's Electric Dreams International Film Festival, Egan's release, The Fix, received the award for Best Visual Effects. Absolutely delighted you were willing to join us in the conversation today. Before we go further, I'd like to introduce my colleagues, Dr. Kellie Wallace and Dr. Elisabetta Di Minico. Kellie, please say something to the audience about who you are, what you do, and why you love sci-fi.
Sure. Hi there. Again, Dr. Kellie Wallace. I am an associate professor of criminology at Yale University in Newton, Massachusetts. I am your friendly neighborhood comic criminologist. I love science fiction. I've been a sci-fi fan since I was a kid. I remember watching Star Trek on TV, the OG Star Trek. I love science fiction stories for a whole multitude of reasons. One, the imagination and the realistic versions of reality, because I personally believe that not all of them are that far-fetched. Like this particular dystopia that we're going to explore today, not all that far-fetched, in my opinion. Could happen a lot sooner than I think we'd be very comfortable with. But another reason I love sci-fi is that even in these otherworldly, fantastical, seemingly unrealistic scenarios and plot lines, settings, atmospheres, whatever you want to use that the world find themselves in, they're still everyday human problems persist. And I think those commonalities actually bring us together more so than drive us apart. Although, you know, in day-to-day life, some of those commonalities seem like really big barriers or really big dividers. But when we look at it in these global contexts of these sci-fi worlds, we realize, no, those are the things that bring us together and that make us human.
Fantastic. How about you, Elisabetta?
Hi everyone, I'm Elisabetta Di Minico. I'm a postdoctoral research, una for career postdoctoral research at the Complutense University of Madrid, and I'm part of the organizers for the Sogni Elettrici Electric Dreams, that is a festival and a conference held at the Ulm University in Milan. I'm specialized in dystopia. Basically, I use movies, comics, novels, TV series to unveil the real dystopian tendencies of our reality. And I like science fiction and, of course, dystopia, because I guess that this genre is able to underline the infection that sometimes is poisoning our reality and to promote empathy, resistance, resilience. So it's a great way to use fiction to do something good in reality and in society.
I love it. Absolutely. And I got to tell you, listening to the two of you and what you've just said, I wonder if this is really a dystopic movie. And what I mean by if you choose it, is it dystopia? You know, I mean, it's a my thing about
the question is dystopia only fiction?
So what we're going to do here is, Kellie, tell everybody why you think they should watch this movie.
Sure. So I kind of went to this movie not quite sure what to expect. I knew it was sci-fi. I knew it had some level of the dystopic narrative to it, which honestly can be kind of a played out narrative, right? It's one of the most common tropes in sci-fi, and sometimes it's a real letdown. But sometimes, like with this movie, it is a breath of fresh air. And so I'm kind of glad I went in a little blind because I did not really expect what came. And I also like movies that I don't see the twist or I don't see what's coming. And so there are a few moments in this one where I was like, oh, okay, that's different. That's not what I thought was going to happen, which I appreciated. There's so many details that I could sit here and talk to you for hours about, Kelsey, to be like, oh my goodness, did like you picked this, or I noticed this, and does that mean anything? And maybe some of them didn't, and it was just me. But one of the larger narratives that I appreciated about this film was trauma, but not just the personal trauma. We're talking about a global level trauma that everybody experienced, right? And it's also the environment's trauma, because that's what led us to where we are. And we as humans were the arbiters of that trauma, right? And so now we're reaping what we sowed, quite literally. Like I said before, the human pieces that come through, you know, Ella's mother died by suicide, which is something we only briefly touch on, but that is her trauma. And it's interesting because some of the characters in her life use that to sort of empathize and explain her behaviors for being sort of this more cold or removed person with a very, you know, flat affect, whereas others use it to sort of justify the success that she seemingly doesn't deserve, but that she's gotten. But we don't, there's only really one character, Gina, who actually like puts Ella's trauma in Ella's perspective and isn't using it as part of like her identity and who she is, but something that she's going through and she has to work through. But Tully even says, we've all been through shit, pardon my language, right? Like she's not the only one. So I really appreciate that, because I always tell people that one person's trauma doesn't negate another's, right? Like we all experience trauma on our own, and there's no, this shouldn't be a better or worse or some type of value ascription, right? But I do appreciate that conversation they have, because oftentimes we do look or phrase trauma in that way in everyday life. Have this individual, very real trauma that was happening to Ella under the umbrella of this global catastrophe that everyone's going through. You know, for some characters, it minimized what she went through, but for Ella, it absolutely did not, right? Like that still happened to her. And even though the world is falling apart and everyone's trying to figure out how to survive, she still needs to grieve and process and move through that trauma on top of the trauma. So it's just a perfect story to me of compounding traumas and how they can, in fact, make things more difficult and make things more like harder to move through. And I think that was kind of her entire story, right? Is like everything was just making it harder and harder for her to be who she was or who she wanted to be and be able to grieve or express in the ways that she wanted. And those compounding impacts and effects that she didn't ask for. I mean, I'm not saying she didn't do them to herself, but she didn't ask for them, right? And yet life goes on. Life will continue. The world will turn regardless of what has happened to you individually or the world as a global entity. So I really appreciated that aspect of that. And I would love to hear a little bit more about you in terms of couching individual trauma in this societal, global, human trauma that we're all experiencing, and just the relationships that those have.
That is a direct question of you, Kelsey.
Let me put you on the spot.
Yeah, I just have to quickly say, first of all, thank you for everything you both have just said, and also for what you've seen in this film, because I think as a filmmaker, I'm inspired by certain ideas or certain themes that really matter to me based on my experiences, right? And my perception of trauma in others or myself or the world. And always try to pack as much of those ideas in my work for it to be conversation points, to provoke, to explore. But I find that nowadays, when we're so bombarded by so much different content, the depths of what you're actually trying to do can get lost or just fall unnoticed. So I'm like really quite touched that you saw all of that, because it's sort of exactly what I'd hoped people would see. So I'm really like, wait, yeah, I'm humbled and really grateful that came across. I think thematically, there's so many different things. I think because of the journey of this film was so long since I wrote the first draft in 2013. And then as like, you know, years and years pass and you're exposed to other things in your life or the world, those things then seep into revision passes, et cetera, et cetera. But when I first tackled the concept, what I was really struck by at that time, and to be fair, still am as a theme, is how much our outside appearance or the presumptions people make about us informs the way they treat us, and that in turn informs how we engage with the world. And I think the character of Ella is such an interesting cocktail showcasing that, because she truly feels that the only thing she's ever received validation for or affirmation for are external things that are completely beyond her control. And that's left her feeling deeply as though she herself isn't particularly liked or valued or appreciated, even if she doesn't know fully what that is yet, she knows for sure that what she's ever received any positive feedback for is something that's just a chance occurrence. Her appearance, her physical appearance or similarity to her mother, her mother's death causing more media and publicity attention onto her, right? And it's definitely developed a form of darkness and resentment and frustration in her as she struggled to grieve, because she hasn't been able to grieve in a healthy way, because all of these quote unquote positive things came out from an event that was horrific for her. But then if she doesn't appreciate it, she's seen as ungrateful, right? And I think the complexity of that is something that I really wanted to showcase and sort of use the Gina and Tully characters and the way they spoke about it to try to explore those different ideas like you observed. But in terms of how, you have two different forms of trauma. You have individual trauma and then you have a macro trauma. And Ella as a character is caught in the middle of where she's trying to just cope with her individual trauma and then is thrust into the spotlight as a potential solution for a global trauma. She's like, what? But I think the transformation, both physical and psychological, that she goes through in the film is the growing appreciation to see outside of herself, to see how she can make a contribution to the world above and beyond how she's perceived, and to just accept and own the fact that she will never necessarily be perceived the way she wants to be, but she needs to live according to the actions that she believes in and that she can justify as being right, and it's her finding what that path is, which I think we all struggle with in different ways in our own lives.
Yeah.
All the time. I'm going to follow up on Kelly's point, get a little nerdy on system science for a moment. One thing I was incredibly struck by was the strategy in the writing, because what we see is Ella making a series of what look to be small choices. Do I give this person one of my drugs or not? Do I give this person one of my drugs or not? Am I good? Am I bad? And all of these small choices, you can see what she's picking initially is one system of who she is. And then later on, dare I say, things she's picking are a different system of who she is. And the movie is just a wonderful examination of what we call in system science a phase transition. You got two systems of order that are struggling for prominence, and there are certain events that push it from one state to another. And this is this is pretty ubiquitous in the natural world, right? Things tend to happen non-linearly, but when things try to occupy the same space, two systems try to occupy the same space, i.e. two different identities, there's a struggle. And this is a story of that struggle. But the linking of her personal struggle, her personal work with the global struggle, the global work, is just beautiful. It's brilliant. And is it dystopia when you want it? Right? In other words, there are choices that are made in this movie that, how I'll say this, District 9, Children of Men, they are fantastic patriarchal science fiction flicks. Now, I love them. They're great movies. But no one makes the kind of choice that gets made in those movies in this movie. And this is an important cutting edge kind of choice to talk about. It's the ultimate Gaia myth and the Gaia story, the power of the divine feminine, if I can say that. I found it thoroughly satisfying and exciting. So, yeah. If any of that made any sense.
No, it did beautifully. And I think you're actually the first person to touch on something rather revolutionary. And I think and hope is maybe the most provocative theme that I want to pose, which is that as a species, we're capable of so much. We're so adaptable. We've proven ourselves to be exquisitely adaptable over multiple generations. But at the same time, we are so resistant to change. And evolutionarily, we're not particularly good at foresight. Like we're very good at short-term gratification, but not in terms of what's best for us in the whole. And then if you hearken back to things like mismatch theory, or something that like Yuval Harari put out so beautifully in Sapiens, we've sort of like put a lot of effort and work into developing a society that seemed to be better or more convenient, but that if you look back to like evolutionary theory and hunter-gatherer society, we didn't actually evolve to best fit. We've set up a way of life that isn't necessarily best for our physical or mental well-being, and have now sort of trapped ourselves in that. So what we've created for ourselves are actually at odds in many ways with our true nature of how we thrive. And I think what sci-fi does so beautifully, and what I was transfixed by it growing up as a kid and voraciously reading science fiction. I have a shout out to Heinlein in this film.
I was going to say, hence the Heinlein reference.
Yeah, exactly. Was the ways in which it made me think more critically about our own society and why we make the choices that we make. And I sort of like put forward other ideas of the ways things could be that from one perspective could appear to be dystopian or negative, but is the way we have chosen the really, truly the right way to live? Are there other ways that could be better? And I think science fiction explores all of that and interrogates like, well, what if we don't go down this path? What happens then versus this other path? And I think what with the fix, and I, again, without at risk of giving too much away or not giving to spoilers, I sort of pose a question of at what point is our humanity put into question? At what point are we willing to embrace change or not embrace change to preserve our own autonomy? And is there a world in which we're actually fully embracing changes that can seem exceptionally extreme to the point of being absolutely horrifying or terrifying or will change the world as we know it forever? At what point do we make a choice that is actually for the greater good or necessary for us to progress species in a way that could be healthier for us or enable our survival, frankly, rather than create scenarios where we're completely dependent on forces that will cause us to lose our autonomy and potentially other things that would maybe even be worse than autonomy. But that's another question.
No, I love it, because usually in sci-fi, when people make a choice of whether or not to opt out of humanity, it looks as though they're jumping into oblivion, right? That's the traditional story, is they're quitting humanity. But everything could always be different. So, what does it mean to really understand that everything could be different? And once you start actually breaking that down as far as you possibly can, well, everything. And then that has a huge impact on how you can think about things, which is so terribly important. How about you, Elizabeth? Oh, go ahead, please.
I was saying, and also, who makes that choice? Who makes that decision? Is it something we individually decide for ourselves, or is it just a choice that is made for us by the larger government systems or whatever the case may be? I just want to piggyback off something you said earlier, Scott, too, that resonated with me. And what you had said, Kelsey, about appearance and being treated by how we're looking. And there is, I'm not going to spoil anything, but there is a scene in the movie where someone interacts with Ella and does not see her as a beautiful person. They see her as someone they're interacting with, but they don't see her as everyone else has seen her. And they ask her, are you good or are you bad? And it's in that moment that we really get to see her taking her power back and making her choice and identity in a moment where I don't know that she thought that she would ever have that experience, because it's very unexpected, the whole engagement with this character. But that to me was one of the most profound lines of the movie, is when she is asked, are you good or are you bad? And she gets to choose. And again, I think that's the first time we really see her power given back to her, and her ability to make that choice, to identify herself, and to not just be a reflection of how everyone else sees her.
Yeah. I also liked how that question being posed to her changed how she dealt with it. Because usually she was just dealing with it internally. I've got to decide. And every once in a while, you need little help from your friends, to put another opportunity out there that you can kind of lean into. And to have it done from a youthful person, eyes unclouded by hate, was brilliant. So we got to go to Elisabetta there. Elisabetta, what's your, why should people watch this movie?
Tons of reason. I've loved the movie, but I particularly loved the way the movie analyzes the treatment of otherness and of women as other, because I saw a double level of otherness construction. There is an otherness. Okay, we can start. Maybe a tribal level. We can start from the special division that is that is really typical of dystopian construction. So there was a red zone and a zone for the elite. There was something available for rich people and resources that were lacking for the poor people. So this was the first view that we have of worthy people and the other. Then there is the idea of mutation, and I'm a big fan of the X-Men. So I love the idea of something different that is able to create hate and fear, because the power needs like useful, docile, and particularly similar creatures to impose its authority. Instead, when there is something different, when there is mutation, when there is change, when there is someone who is out of the status quo, this generate an opposition, conflict, margins. And so the idea of this society that can survive through mutation, maybe, but at the same time could refuse mutation, or will refuse mutation, is wonderful. And also the protagonist, she's great. And again, we are there is a body of a woman that can be seen as a medium for power. So she's the other also from herself at some point, because as Kelsey was saying, she has always think of herself as a beautiful person. So when this beauty starts to disappear, she has no idea of what she is. So the trauma you were talking about before. So there are so many levels of reading in this movie, and they are all amazing. So I was just thinking about, do you wanted to do something about otherness, or otherness was just in the middle of the story because it is a powerful metaphor?
Oh, good question. I think otherness has always been sort of in the zeitgeist in my framework for what I talk about. And I'm not sure if that's because of the types of literature I was most attracted to, what Earth films I was attracted to that I grew up reading. But I know that in my own life, one of the choices that drove me to base myself in South Africa was this really deep desire to truly learn and understand other perspectives and really get what it felt like to be a fish out of water, or to be sort of the outsider in a space. Because I think it has such a profound impact on individuals and also the world, that I thought not understanding that from a personal perspective would actually be an injustice as a writer. And so I think having otherness featured, I wouldn't say it was something that I was like, oh, I need to write a movie about otherness. It's more that it's impossible to write a decent film without acknowledging otherness in every sphere. Because it is constantly with us. But I can say that with regards to the sort of the very, very real and profound ways that the way we are treated, it affect how we engage with the world, that, applies to otherness if we're treated or profiled in one way and then treated accordingly as other. That creates a dynamic that can be very, very harmful and very dangerous, and takes a huge amount of strength and fortitude other individuals to weather and come out and choose and be sort of bigger than the treatment they're receiving. And I think a lot of credit needs to be drawn to that. And I don't want to give it away, but you'll know what I'm talking about. There's a specific exchange between Ella and Solomon towards the end of the film where he sort of highlights the fact that if he had just taken how other people perceived him for over life based on where he comes from, his background, he would be in a much worse place if he just accepted how he was profiled. And that and sort of Ella objects to how difficult it can be. He's like, yeah, I never said it was going to be easy.
Exactly.
And that's the point.
Exactly. No, I love your reference there to friends, found family, people that would will provide you a space to explore your own questions about who you are. Um, and some people want that and some people don't,
Yeah.
right? Some people find themselves in spaces that are conveniently fixed in a sense so that they don't ever have that struggle. Privilege tends to be one of the ways we acquire those spaces. Yes. So any final comments, Kelsey, on why people should see this movie?
Wow, I obviously have so many reasons, but I think maybe something I can say two things to this. One, in a very oversaturated space where we are inundated with content from so many different platforms, it's become increasingly difficult for independent films to pop or have a voice. And if anyone chooses to watch this one, what I would say is we fought to make this movie for a decade.
Mm,
There's every possible imaginable permutation of financing and packaging to make it viable, to be able to make it. And what makes it so unusual and what the aim and aspiration was is because it is a South African developed and it's conceived film. And it's a 100% South African production. And the idea behind creating the film initially was to sort of defy the stereotypes around what an African film needed to be or was, and showcase to the greater world our sort of a knack or a talent that I identified in South Africa that most people aren't aware of, which is that there are so many films that are shot in South Africa by major studios and production companies that no one ever knows was done there because
mm,
it's shot for another part of the world using South African talent. But the story is not set in South Africa and there's no obvious South African characters. But these massive contributions are sort of a service from a service industry point of view, sort of go unnoticed. And the ethos behind the creation of this film was to let our South African talent star opposite our wonderful international cast on equal footing, let our South African crew be in heads of department roles that are normally reserved for international heads of department flown out to shoot in South Africa, and showcase this ability and this understanding of the international market, and the ability to engage in a dialogue with the international market, but
mm.
as a proudly South African film. And now, over the last decade, we've seen immense changes in the film and television space. But when I first wrote this film, it was with that goal in place to achieve those ends. So what you're seeing is not a independent film that's coming out of a US space or a European space. This is an independent film coming out of South African space, but engaging in dialogues and themes that are globally resonant and universal.
No, that's fantastic. How can people help you get this movie out there?
Well, going back to that, it's harder than ever to get noticed, and this is a truly independent film, which has taken a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to see the light of day. There's a couple of things that our North American distributor has told us will really, really, really help push the needle in terms of getting the film in front of as many viewers as possible. And one of them is that we now have a pre-order link available for Apple TV to pre-buy the film. Our official release is on the 22nd of November, but if you pre-buy the film, and we have enough people pre-buy the film, we'll receive a prominent placement, like the film itself will be featured in the iTunes or Apple TV storefront. And that is a priceless marketing win for us because it means that anyone who has Apple TV, who goes to look at what they feel like watching, will see the fix pop up. And that's like, it's just visibility. And it sounds so small and so simple, but we don't have
It's huge.
yeah, like it's priceless. So right now we've managed to get 75 pre-orders from friends and family and the few people that have seen the film that are fans, but we're trying to hit a minimum of 200. So if this sounds interesting to you, if you're willing to if you have a couple bucks spare and willing to help champion independent filmmaking in a time when the industry is really changing and films like this will stop being made, we will not financed anymore to make movies like this if they don't manage to make their money back. And we're in a very scary space in the industry landscape with the advent of AI, with the streamers, where harder and harder and harder to get truly independent films made, which means you end up servicing a sort of more formulaic template of material of very safe content rather than truly original material. And this is a project that came from a very authentic original place we were not dictated to. So if you want to even support, even if the film itself doesn't interest you, if you just want to support independent cinema and independent art, please pre-buy the film.
No, fantastic.
Can we pre-order from Europe? No, because it's the US platform, right?
Yeah, it's unfortunately only people in the US and Canada at the moment. If you go to the link, when I try to go to the link, it doesn't work for me. But in the US and Canada, it does work. And as soon as we get the additional release information for other territories, we will of course share. That's all in the works, but the North America and South African releases are coming first.
Well, Aethera is very real, not just in the pharma industry,
In every industry.
but every industry. So let's all be rebels and help Kelsey with this movie. Kelsey, it's been an absolute blast to talk about the flick, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to you in more detail, entailing spoilers and such, so we can tell you all the really interesting things that we found in it.
100%. Would love that.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much.